All right, we are live. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me tonight here on Blind Whiskey Reviews. Got a few people in the chat already, and tonight we are joined by a very special guest. You guys have probably noticed I've been reviewing some whiskeys from a certain whiskey company lately and over the last few weeks, and Chris here was kind enough to join me tonight. It's Chris Frederickson, one of the co-founders of Traverse City Whiskey Company. I kept saying it wrong, and people kept giving me shit. So, anyways, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. How are you doing, man?
Doing well. So congratulations. You definitely pronounced my name correctly. And while we're talking about name pronunciation, let's talk about Traverse City Whiskey.
Absolutely.
So the correct pronunciation is it's a hard Trav. So Traverse, not Traverse. Traverse City Whiskey.
So I said Traverse every time in the first two reviews because that's just I'll actually own a Traverse, so it's just ingrained in me. That's what I need to say. So that's what I thought I thought I was doing right, and a handful of people, I'm sure fellow Michiganites, decided to inform me that I was absolutely wrong. So we corrected it. Thank you for doing that. Hopefully these guys come in the chat. We can give them a little bit of a hard time, but I'm glad we fixed that.
Yeah.
So we got to the bottom of that piece, but let's talk a little bit about you. I want to get a little bit of background, talk a little bit about your kind of whiskey journey. Obviously, you didn't start out owning a whiskey company or distilling whiskey. So kind of how did you get into this world? What led you into the whiskey hobby?
Yeah, it was actually, so my journey into the whiskey world was happenstance. My business partners and I were aficionados. We were living away from home. First of all, I'm born and raised in Traverse City. I went away to school where I met my current business partners. You know, we moved out of state, had our professional careers. We were whiskey nerds at the time. We were living in Chicago, and I remember I started my own whiskey club back in 2011 with friends from around the world. And I would go to Binny's, and I still have some of the bottles from my bourbon trust group, but I was going to Binny's and buying like ridiculous bottles for, at cost, at state minimum. And I was shipping samples I had friends in every time zone, all the way from Europe to Australia. And we would kind of have a drafted itinerary, and we would step through different fun facts about booze and just catching up and, bullshitting and just having a good time. At the time I was working in management consulting and living on the road and just over it kind of. And in 2011, my father and I found a set of distilling patents that my great grandfather had patented during the Prohibition that were their distilling techniques. Had a few whiskeys with my business partners, Jared Moti, and we birthed an idea called Traverse City Whiskey. And we happened to have a friend of a friend who knew a guy whose dentist was, whatever the story was, but knew the salesman at MGP. And we had a connection to get 20 barrels of whiskey. So we registered our business name, filed for a DSP, the Distilled Spirits Permit. And a year later, we had a bottle of 4-year aged 21% MGP bourbon on the shelf.
Nice. How long did it take you guys to go through those 20 barrels?
It went quick. That was like the icebreaker for we should quit our full-time jobs and do this for a living. We cycled through the 20 barrels in about a year, which may not sound like a lot, but for us, it was an incredible velocity coming from nothing. I mean, we started from nothing, and the market wasn't what it is today. So as soon as we bought the 20, we went through about 10, and then we had a hook on another 20, and it was like, whoa. We dumped our life savings just in to start the company, and it was like double or nothing. So now all the revenue that we generated, we're either going to reinvest and make this something, or, call it what it is. But we doubled down, and fast forward one more year, we had opened our first location downtown Traverse City, our distillery and tasting room, and had we leveraged our DSP to start bottling in house, distilling everything in house, and we opened our cocktail bar January 2015. So,
nice.
yeah, we made a dent in the market in Michigan, and then quickly expanded out to Indiana, Illinois, and a few other states. And that's kind of the story about how we got started. But it was a rough, rocky, not terribly glamorous beginning, but it has certainly been worth the time to get to where we're at today.
Of course.
Yeah.
So how long did you guys source MGP stuff? Was that several years, or did you guys quickly start distilling after that?
We quickly started distilling. And we were very confident by 2017 that we were going to be able to cut over and rely on our own distillate, which would be the rye and the bourbon. And then out of nowhere, so we released the cherry whiskey in 2015, and at the time, the market generally, not just in Michigan but across the country, wasn't ready for another flavored anything. So it was right after like the cotton candy vodka, like just not necessarily great spirit wave, and that the shelves were dense with flavored stuff, and they were like, we don't need a cherry whiskey. And then in 2016, people realized that whiskey is pretty cool, and there were a lot of drinkers that were intimidated by heavy hitters, heavy bourbons, heavy ryes, just like higher proof, and they needed a kind of a gateway to like truly enjoy the more romantic side of whiskey. And that's where the cherry whiskey came in. The cherry whiskey took off, and we couldn't keep up with it. We couldn't distill fast enough to react to the velocity of the cherry sales. So we were contract producing alongside, or we were producing alongside MGP. They were contract producing for us for a long time. They still are a little bit, but not as much lately. And through that, we've launched, we launched originally with our straight bourbon whiskey, which is our Triple X. It's bottled at 43%. We have our cherry whiskey that you and I opened before we went live. Yeah, you got the cute little 200.
Cutie.
That's actually what's in my glass right now.
Actually, I'm going to put it in my glass right now. So
please join me.
This is one I have not tried. I've tried the other 4. I have not tried the cherry yet, and I thought it'd be cool to do it live here on the channel. So let's pour some whiskey.
Is this would this be a good time to explain what the cherry is?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely talk about that.
Okay, great. So like I said, we launched back in 2012 with our straight bourbon, which at the time was a 4-year MGP straight bourbon, bottled 86 proof. In late 2014-ish, we released our American Cherry Edition, which has a red label and bottled 35%, 70 proof. This is the same bourbon, not aged all the 4 years. It's aged between 2 and 3 years. And our process for finishing it is diluting it down to 70 proof and then steeping. We take a cheesecloth, fill it with 10 pounds of Mount Morency sour cherries, and then steep the cherries into the bourbon. We do 10 pounds for every 2 barrels for 10 days. And so we steep the cherries. They give off a nice aroma and a taste. And it's a lot more approachable than like a barrel proof bourbon or something like that.
Yeah, and I haven't tasted it yet. I'm smelling it, and it legitimately smells like a cherry lifesaver. Like that's like the first, like it's just got that super rich, sweet cherry character going on.
Yeah, it's one thing that we've always found, that we've always appreciated, is the reaction when you taste versus just nosing a little bit.
Let's get there.
Yeah, let's get there. So it's the in our opinion, the taste doesn't necessarily match the intensity, the punch of the nose.
I would say there's as much cherry flavor on the palate as there is on the nose, but there's not as much of a candied quality. It doesn't come across quite as sweet. It comes across more like a natural cherry on the palate than it does on the nose. On the nose, it smells like candy.
Candy, sure. Yeah, so the way we've always tried to explain the cherry is it's whiskey with a hint of cherry, not cherry with a hint of whiskey. We want to make sure that we're still appealing to the enthusiast and the, somebody trying to get into the category. Yeah, the cherry whiskeys had enormous success across the country, especially as of the last 2 years. It's now our best-selling product. Price point's about $30, maybe a hair more depending on what state you're in. But it's it's a great sipper. You can sip it neat. It marries well in cocktails. Just all around approachable. And like we had talked about before we kicked off the live segment, Traverse City is the cherry capital of the world.
So what better place to make a cherry whiskey?
Yeah, my old man, my father's a third generation cherry farmer. So we farm the fruit that goes into the whiskey and kind of have like a vertical integration component to the product.
No, that's awesome. And actually, this is pretty darn good, man. And I was telling you before we started, like I've never been a big flavored whiskey fan, and this is good. I think it goes well. I think I actually think that the younger whiskey complements it pretty well, as opposed to maybe older whiskey wouldn't let that cherry shine so much. Maybe it might take away from some of that cherry character. I think the younger notes kind of play better with the cherry than maybe an older whiskey would. So it's really quite good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let me see here. I love that nose too. I mean, I love like the kind of juxtaposition of that really like candied nose to the like just very like tame, natural cherry kind of flavor on the palate. I'm really curious to make cocktails with that. Actually, one question I have for you, I've always wondered this, and a lot of times you find that flavored whiskeys, and yours included, are bottled at a lower proof. They're bottled at like 70 proof. Is there a reasoning for that?
I don't know if there's a general reason, but I can tell you that, first of all, we've tried the maceration process at a higher proof. So we have an all natural process to make the whiskey. I think a lot of distilleries don't take such an organic approach to like producing, but because we're steeping, if we steep at too high of a proof, the ethanol in the whiskey will actually like destroy the cherry, and we end up getting like too much wood from the cherry pit itself. So the approach that we take is lower proof.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's our reason for going lower proof. We also experimented higher than this, and the higher that we went, like obviously the more whiskey in the bottle, the more that we masked the cherry. And so we were trying to find the right balance to actually bring the cherry into the equation without it being overpowering, without the whiskey being overpowering, because the whiskey will quickly dominate. The wood, the oak will take over.
Yeah, I think balance is such a key thing with whiskey, and a lot of people just don't get it, So I think this one's really, really well balanced. Just a good amount of cherry, but it's not overwhelming the whiskey. The whiskey's still there. You can still taste the whiskey.
Yeah.
Which cannot be said for other whiskeys like Fireball.
Is that whiskey?
I mean, not in my book, man. So going back to you a little bit more. what got? I mean, you kind of made your way into whiskey, but what led you into whiskey? Were you into something else beforehand? I mean, were you like a craft beer guy? Were you a wine guy? Like, what? Generally, people don't just like, oh, I'm 21, let's start drinking whiskey. What like brought you to whiskey?
Yeah, it was actually some of the whiskey bars back in 2009, 2010 that I was visiting around Chicago. But again, there wasn't the romance around the the process and the spirit that there is today. I had a friend introduce me to, I think it was Stag, and he said, "You're probably not ready for this, but this for you will be a shotgun to the face." And I didn't know what that meant, and I had a sip, and I didn't even drink it. I didn't even have a sip of it for the first 15 minutes. I just buried my nose and just enjoyed the aroma of the spirit. And that was kind of my gateway into appreciating the kind of the nuances of whiskey. And but again, like Stag is just not on the shelf like it was back then. But so we just started tasting through,
No,
so many
and it's
different
tragic.
spirits. It is it is tragic. But that's kind of how I got
And
into
not
it.
many people
And
can say that Stags what got them into whiskey either.
yeah, it sounds a little
That's a
snotty. I
pretty
mean,
unique one to say. Oh man, Stag was the one.
I just remember that so vividly,
So
sitting at a whiskey bar, and the
I,
shotgun to the face example was like, yeah,
Stag didn't have to be your first, but that's a unique experience. I don't think most people get to experience. So let's see here. Let's move on to another whiskey here. I want to get into the. I'm gonna pour a little bit of the port.
cool.
That was the first one I reviewed, and I really enjoyed it. Again, I thought it was just pretty well balanced. It had some. It had some. I found some similarities to like other port finished whiskeys, kind of like Angel's Envy. It just tasted like a younger Angel's Envy to an extent. Like I don't know if you guys disclose how old the whiskeys here are, but my guess, I think at the time I said it was maybe like a 2 or 3 year old whiskey.
Yeah, the port finish is probably 3 plus, but it's rested for more than 6 months. It's probably right. What batch of the port do you have?
I have, let's see, batch 3.
Batch three. Okay, so that's probably a 6 month finish. It was a 3 to 4 year bourbon with a 6 month finish.
But yeah, like I said, like other port finished bourbons like Angel's Envy, I think I tend to be a little bit older, but I kind of like some of the younger notes. And I'm not a huge fan of young whiskey typically. I just like
Sure.
when it's really well blended with other things, and people do a good job of kind of manipulating those young notes to make them work for the whiskey instead of work against it. And I think this one kind of does that. The port really balances well with the young whiskey notes. Sometimes young whiskey can come off dry, and it's pretty evenly handed where the port really kind of balances that dryness out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am getting some weird feedback here. I don't know if you're getting that.
I'm not. It's not coming through on my end.
All right. Yeah, so I think you guys did a pretty good job of balancing that one. So how do you feel that like the climate where you guys are impacts your whiskey? Because obviously everywhere's different. Climate is a big deal when it comes to aging whiskey. Kentucky is like, the pinnacle, bourbons and things like that. So when you leave Kentucky, bourbons aren't the same thing necessarily anymore. They kind of take on different characters. So what do you think that like the climate where you are, how does that impact your whiskey?
Yeah, great question. So we have trademarked a moniker for Traverse City Whiskey, and that the moniker is the whiskey of the North. And what that means to us is what makes us different. What separates us from Kentucky is we have 4 very defined seasons, and our shoulder seasons aren't much of a blanket. Summer's hot, winter is really cold. The walls, so we have concrete walls in our rack house, they freeze over. So there's moisture from the evaporation from the barrels, and there's come December, January, there is a thin wall of ice that sits next to all of the barrels on that wall.
Really? Are you guys losing water while you're aging your whiskey?
Ironically, in Michigan, because of our relative humidity, we lose alcohol.
Yeah.
So we have not opened a barrel up north. So that's like the Michigan thing up north. We have not opened a barrel up north with a proof greater than 116 to 118. We lose.
And your entry proof's what, 120 or something?
120, 125. Yeah. And we just, it's a constant cycle of losing more and more. So our oldest whiskey, and we do have some aged MGP bourbon. A lot of folks down south will open the same or similar barrels and achieve like 110, 115. But those barrels, we can't get hotter than 103, 104, 105 because the aging with our seasons just sucks the ethanol out of the barrel. And it's unfortunate. It really is.
It does, but at least you guys are able to keep some whiskey. And do you guys get a larger percentage of evaporation than a normal like Kentucky distillery would? Like, do you lose more product?
We don't. No, we've. I think. Well, from what I know, I think our losses are about the same. We calculate between 2% and 5% per year.
Okay.
And then another difference is that so beyond the proof changing, because of this constant flux of weather, hot to cold all year round, and like super cold colds and warm warms, we do get a lot more interaction of the spirit with the wood. So the blessing in disguise is that although it is lower proof, the flavor profile after time is more robust because it's had that much more time to tinker in the oak.
And maybe that's a good note to move on to your barrel proof whiskey that I have. And I was really impressed, and I don't know how old this whiskey actually is, but on the bottle, I believe it said it was at least 4 years old, I think was the verbiage on the bottle. But it definitely does not have the color or the flavor and complexity of a 4-year-old bourbon. I found it to be way, oftentimes a 4-year-old bourbon, it's right at that line where it doesn't taste young anymore, but it doesn't really take on a lot of complexity, and it doesn't take on a lot of depth just yet. It's got still lighter flavors. You lose kind of that grassiness of a young whiskey, but you don't have a lot of complexity, and I didn't find that with yours. I mean, I found it to be pretty in-depth, pretty complex. I don't know if you guys can appreciate the color, but pretty darn dark for what I'm assuming is a 4 to 5 year old whiskey.
I'm going to join you.
And I guess that's another question I have for you too, is I noticed the verbiage on some of the bottles is different, and maybe you can clear this up. But several of them say produced and bottled by Traverse. And one of them, I think it was the rye maybe, says distilled and bottled by. And even I think you said you said the bourbon and the rye were completely your distillate.
The rye is completely
the rye, because that was the only one that says distilled. So I assumed at some point either it's a blend or a sourced whiskey in those mixes with the other ones that said produced.
Yep. So first of all, to clarify, what we're both drinking right now, the barrel proof bourbon, this is a 5-year bourbon, and it's a blend of 5 or 6 barrels per batch. This 100% of this distillate, 100% of the barrel proof bourbon distillate is MGP bourbon. So like I was saying earlier, back in 2017, we were very confident that we'd be able to transition from produced by to distilled by, which is a big thing for a distiller. And it was the trajectory of the cherry whiskey that threw the curveball. Like there's just no way we're going to keep up with that in-house. So the only spirit that we have that we could organically transition to the distilled by statement was the rye. And it wasn't something that we were pushing, and it just happened to have a different sales trajectory than the other products. And we were hoping by 2017 that we'd be that we'd be kind of like cut off from the produced and bottled by. But if at this point, produced and bottled by implies that there's a blend of our distillate and MGP's distillate, not a true like it's the estate grown bourbon.
No, actually, even for so the barrel proof you said is 100% MGP whiskey, and really, I've had young MGP bourbon in this age range. You guys must pick some good barrels because usually it's not amazing. Not that it's bad, but it just doesn't usually have this kind of depth. So good on you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is this is from the sample kit that we sent you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the we kind of went on a bit of a bottling rampage last year. Back in April 2019, our barrel proof bourbon took a double gold and best in category at the San Francisco International Wine and Spirits Competition, and the product that you're drinking just took off. I mean, it was a pretty big marker of success for the company, and it became way more of a staple in our portfolio than it had been in years past.
Yeah, it's definitely good. And you guys, like, I mean, if it's just source whiskey, I have some people, I don't really ever understand it, but some people in the whiskey hobby world look down on sourcing whiskey, and I just really don't understand why. Like, as a business model, when you look at the challenges of, for most distilleries, it's a bare minimum of 2 years before you can make any money. If you were to just say, I'm going to open a distillery and start making whiskey, hope it's good, and start putting it out when it's 2 years old, that's 2 years you have to wait to make $1.
Yep.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
So I really don't understand why people look down on distilleries having to source whiskey, which is generally damn good whiskey like this, and use that to generate revenue while they make their products and start keeping their, building their supply of their own distillate.
Yeah. It's cool that you bring that up. Can kind of help me transition into our future. So,
absolutely,
a year ago, we partnered with Vendome and another fermentation tank fabricator out of Montreal, and we have all the toys right now to make to have robust production. And we were about to break ground in March on our distillery campus up here in Traverse City. It's a 35-acre parcel that currently houses a 30,000 square foot building, which is way more room than our current shop has. And we were about to break ground, and then things happened around the world that prevented that. And now we're kind of in a holding pattern, and we're itching to get our toys online, and we're excited to begin producing ourselves for the first time on that scale ever. Our capacity is 3 barrels a day, and the new equipment brings us on 3 shifts up to 67. So it's a strong multiple, and it's something that we're just like, the pandemic really threw a curve into the plan.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
they threw a monkey wrench in everybody's plans.
Yeah. But yeah, so frankly, we're very excited to branch off on our own and do something special that relates directly to kind of the heritage of Northern Michigan.
Well, that's cool, man. Hopefully you guys, this thing dies back quickly here and you guys can get that up and running, because that sounds awesome. So let's see what we got here. I'm gonna take another sip of this whiskey because delicious. I've always been a fan of MGP whiskey. I generally like it at like 7 years and up, which is why I'm really impressed with that. Like, very good stuff. I've had other companies putting out like 4 and 5 year old MGP that I just thought was total trash. So,
Sure.
Barrel selection is king.
It is, yeah.
Oh, you know what? I had someone ask a question. I forgot I was going to ask you about the port before we move on. James Coleman asked me, he was curious as to, do you use like a specific type of port barrels? Like, I think he'd asked if it was tawny port or.
It's they're ruby port barrels, brought in from Portugal. It's all French oak, 59 gallon, and they came wet with port wine. We dumped out the port, backfilled with, it was probably 39 to 40 some month bourbon, and backfilled, and that was resting and is resting currently. You want a teaser?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're actually pulling the port off the market temporarily, and we're relaunching the port and some of its new friends under what we're calling the finishing series. And the finishing series consists of the bourbon rested in port wine barrels, our 100% rye rested in Cabernet Franc barrels, and our high rye bourbon rested in sherry barrels. And we're relaunching the port, but with some patriots of to hold it in a higher standard. And we're going to launch the finishing series as a kind of as its own beast, and that's happening in the next month or two. And
that'll be awesome.
These finishes are exceptional. They're so good, and the diversity among recipe of whiskey and then finish among the different wine casks is fun to share, because you have perspective between the mash bill meets the wine.
So are you using your standard, I know obviously you don't have a high rye whiskey that you're putting out, but are you using like your standard bourbon that you're aging? And are you using a different recipe of bourbon or a different blend of bourbon? Is it going to be like your standard bourbon aged in those casks?
Yes. So our standard bourbon resting in the port, the 36% high rye, resting in the sherry, and then our 100% rye resting in the it's a local winery, like a neighboring winery. They make a Cab Franc, and then we backfill the Cab Franc barrels.
No, that's gonna be awesome. I mean, it's always good, like, as whiskey fans always want to try something new. You can only drink the same bourbon so many times in a row before you're like, I just want to try something different, something unique. And I think finishes are a great way to do that. And again, it's kind of like one of those things that's just hot and cold in the whiskey world. Like, some people are like so pro finish, like, great, it's awesome, and other people are just, no, it's not bourbon anymore. Like, you can't do that. You've tainted the whiskey, right. And I really don't understand it. As long as people are being upfront about what they're doing, why do you care that they're trying to make a unique and different product? Like, more things for you to try,
Yeah. Our so I have a guy who distills alongside me, and his man, when we bring these projects up, it creates so much good energy at our distillery. It's so much fun to toy around and really just play and not be so hyper rigid with kind of the confines of the craft, right? Did I lose you?
Well, you're breaking up a little bit, Chris. You there? I think we might have lost you. We might have lost Chris, everybody. Hopefully he'll be able to reconnect here in a second. While we're waiting for Chris to pop back on, let's see what do we got everybody drinking tonight? You guys drinking anything good out there? There he is. You look like you're back. You back, Chris?
You bet.
There you are. All right. We lost you for about a minute there. Let me see here. We had a question pop up in the chat. What is this feedback? I have never had feedback on a live stream, and for some reason I'm getting some right now. Let's see. Cooper 57M is asking, is there any worry about going from an MGP distillate to your own distillate and having a drastically different flavor profile?
There is definitely concern, but it's actually not for our base bourbon. It's for the cherry whiskey. How would our own in-house distillate, slightly different recipe, how would that impact the cherry, and what would that do to, kind of the future of where it's going? We're concerned. We don't have a strategy for it yet. we every day we have 1,000 problems to solve. That is a future problem that we're aware of, and that's actually a really good question, because it is a chief concern when you have a product that has relied on one recipe historically.
So while you were talking about that, I mixed a little bit of the cherry in with the barrel proof. Pretty damn good. Pretty damn good. That hint of cherry it really shines through. I was surprised. I thought it would die back a little bit more, and it doesn't want to. It wants to show itself. That cherry wants to be in the whiskey.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm just a cherry fan, but I like it. All right. Let's move on and talk about your rye a little bit. Now, for whatever reason, and I don't quite understand, rye is just not as popular as bourbon, and there's so many similarities with rye and bourbon that I don't understand why the popularity of one or the other is so much different. But I'm a big fan of rye. I love rye. Rye tends to be better at a younger age. So for me, you can get, potentially a slightly less expensive product that is a little bit younger that tastes equally as good as some bourbons out there that are much older.
Yep.
So I reviewed this one. I just put this review out today, and I really like the rye. It's definitely a young rye. I mean, it does not taste like an older aged rye, but again, it just feels well done. And being purely your distillate, that's impressive. I found this in a couple other younger ryes. I've really found this very strong, almost like peach character in there that I really enjoyed. I'm not sure if that's something you guys normally get, but it was really fantastic.
Yeah, I remember you pulled that out of the rye and the barrel proof bourbon, right?
The barrel proof bourbon, I got this like peach note on it.
Right.
It wasn't strong, but it was there. Yeah, it's just a very solid rye. Like I said, it's definitely a young rye. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't have the off-putting notes that sometimes you get on a young whiskey. It's not overly grassy. You don't have this big dill explosion. It's well balanced. It's got nice, sweet, light fruit flavors. It's a little floral. It's got that like orchard fruit peach character, which I really like. There it is.
This is the sample that you have?
No, yours is different than mine. Yours is better than mine. Yours is 2% higher in alcohol. So is the one I have the current one, or is the one you have the current release of that?
They're both the current release, just different evolution of the label.
Gotcha. Yeah, mine's bottled at 45%.
Yep.
Yours, I think it said 47. So
it does. So we up in Traverse City, we every one of our spirits, with the exception of the barrel proof whiskeys, we have our small batch edition that you're drinking, and we have our Stillhouse edition, which so even like the cherry whiskey or the bourbon or the rye are all bottled at a slightly higher proof at the Stillhouse in Michigan. Kind of a weird quirk, but yeah, this is it's the same juice, just I'm drinking about 2% more ABV per sip.
Hey man, that 2% can make a difference. Yeah, I've always kind of been an advocate. Maybe this is a good question for you, but I've always kind of been an advocate of, in general, under 90 proof doesn't really, I never found it to be a benefit to the whiskey. So from a business perspective and someone who obviously produces a whiskey that's at, I think it's 86 proof, 43% on your bourbon.
Yep.
What drives you guys to keep it in the 80s as opposed to moving it to like a 90 proof release?
Yeah. It has a lot to do with approachability. So we found that sweet spot for for blending and drinking and cocktails and however you want to sip your whiskey, 43% is the minimum that we would go with a stock bourbon. We went lower at that with the cherry just to maintain the, the kind of a standard that was easier to drink for, non-enthusiasts. But for the bourbon and the rye, I mean, you do typically tease out a better flavor at a lower proof. Your palate can actually sense it better. But really, it's as we taste through it. As an example, we just talked about the finishing series, and we went through probably 6 to 10 rounds of R&D of each spirit with a hydrometer, teasing out the exact proof that it was at equilibrium with your palate. And it was not fun R&D. It was the core crew around the round table at our shop, and we spent a lot of thoughtful time finding the right balance between approachable flavor. At some point you get too much ethanol and it masks the enjoyment. Or not ours, but everybody, when we were doing the R&D for the finishing series, everybody said barrel proof everything, just barrel proof, do it. And of course, not every pallet is built for barrel proof. So we had to kind of piece together something that made sense for a bigger market and more pallets. And that's where we started back in 2012 with the 43% bourbon and the 90% rye. Excuse me, 90 proof and 86 proof. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have been one of those guys chanting barrel proof, but that's just me.
Yeah. It was a tough battle.
I think there's definitely a balance, and I think there's definitely, I mean, as a company, it's tough because, all your whiskey enthusiasts are all going to want higher proof. That's just what everybody wants. But your whiskey enthusiasts aren't necessarily, your core customer base. There's a balance somewhere in there where it's like, you got to be approachable. Not everybody wants to melt their face off with flavor. And like you said, there is a point at which the alcohol masks flavor. Like there is definitely barrel proof whiskeys that taste better than their watered down counterparts because the high proof hides some of those imperfections in the whiskey, so I've definitely experienced that.
Yep. Yeah. And it's, even so many enthusiasts that drink barrel proof, a lot of them will add the cube, and I hate using the term like it'll open it up, but it really does expose more flavor to a less developed palate. And that's a great thing, I think.
No, absolutely. I think using water early on was a good experience for me. I don't do it anymore. I mean, for me, I want to taste the whiskey the way it was meant to be drank. And for me, I like higher proofs. I like the flavor that comes with that proof generally. Every once in a while, maybe you'll throw a few drops of water in, but for the most part, I like enjoying my whiskey neat. But I think it's a good learning experience to kind of add that water to the whiskey and see what it does to it. It makes changes, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, and you get to learn about it.
Agreed.
Cooper 57M asked again, what markets and states are you in, and what price points are we talking about? So, where are you guys available? I mean, I don't know how many states you guys are in at this point, but
yep. So, to keep it high level and not too specific, but we are in 25 states, so half the country. Most of the states that we're in hug the coast, so most of the East Coast, most of the West Coast, and what we call the Midwest Coast, and which includes Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, and that will that's where we'll distribute the bourbon, the cherry whiskey, and then other spirits depending on the demand of the time. And price points, the cherry whiskey and the bourbon are they retail for around $30. The rye is 35 plus, and the port is at about 40, and the barrel proof bourbon and the barrel proof rye are right around 70 and 80.
So you guys do release a barrel proof rye. I don't think I've seen that before.
Yeah, we hid it from you.
I know. Dang. We got another question in here. It says, and I don't know why he's asking this question, but do you freeze the cherries first and then defrost them to add them to your bourbon?
That is a very interesting question. The answer is yes. We do freeze them. It's almost like a cherry grower asked that question.
It was a valid question, apparently.
It was. Yep.
So is the freezing part of preserving the fruit, or is the freezing do something to the fruit that allows you to get more flavor out of it or something?
No, preservation. It's the way to let a cherry live, is, almost indefinitely. You can freeze a cherry for many years, but it's the surest way to get the best quality product throughout the year. Every year in northern Michigan, the cherry harvest is right around the last week of July, early August. And after that, the cherries get sent to the freezer and then put away until they're needed.
All right. Yeah, because I remember, part of the reason I asked is I remember I homebrewed for a long time beer, and there was certain fruits when you want to make a fruited beer that you froze them first because it would like burst the cells inside of the fruit, and it would allow it to like release more flavor when you put it in the mash. So I didn't know if that had something to do with that, but it's kind of interesting. It's just sometimes it's just we need to keep the cherries good for the rest of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So we are coming up on about 50 minutes here. I've got, if you'll indulge me here, let me find it really quick. I got something fun I thought to do. Have you ever watched the show Hot Ones?
I have not.
All right. So on the show Hot Ones, it's a fun little YouTube internet show that's very popular, where they interview celebrity guests while they eat progressively hotter hot wings. But one of the they have on that show is called Explain That Gram. And they go and dive into the guest's Instagram, show some pictures, and allow them to kind of explain what's going on in the picture. Now, you were a tough one to find. I had a hard time finding your Instagram, but I found it. And so let me see if I can. I've actually never shared my screen on StreamYard. So let's see how this works. Let's see if this works. So application window. Here we go. Share this. All right. Can you see my screen?
I can.
There we go. So I blew through your Instagram. I saw a couple interviews that you had done with some other outlets out there, and it sounds like you're a pretty outdoorsy kind of guy. And I think maybe this kind of lends into a little bit of that conversation. But what do we have going on in this picture?
Yeah, cool photo to find. So I'm going to give you a very quick backstory before this photo is shot. So Traverse City Whiskey is we're friends with the Discus organization, which is the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States that represents. They're kind of the face of craft distilleries for the United States across the world, and we've been friends with that organization for a while. And this picture was taken just before we flew. So this picture was taken in South Africa at a game reserve, and we were on our way to meet with the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. But we had a quick stop in the park to see the Big Five and kind of experience South Africa, and go on to represent craft spirits with. It was actually one of the last times that I traveled with Dave Pickerel, Um, Former master distiller Whistle Pig, and I mean everybody knows Dave, but this picture kind of symbolizes that that trip and that experience. And this was following.
That's
a
an awesome
zebra.
picture, man. It looks like a great.
Yeah, following a
It
zebra.
looks like
down
it
the
would have been an
trail
amazing time.
at about 5 a.m.
Actually,
4
that
a.m.
brings me to a question I wanted to ask you that we didn't get to real quick. But, in talking about Dave Pickerel, he was obviously one of the big players out there that would do consultation with distilleries when they were kind of getting up and running, or Nancy Freely's another one that does a lot of it. When you guys were starting to make your own distillate, I'm imagining you didn't have a lot of experience. What did you guys bring someone on to kind of help you through that process?
Yeah, we actually worked with Dave. We worked with Dave, and there was also kind of a craft spirits incubator at Michigan State University. But between the two, between him and them, we kind of triangulated the approach, the recipe, the style that we landed with today.
Awesome.
Yeah, I have.
All right, let's move on to our next.
Go ahead.
Here again, I found a lot of stuff about you like in the outdoors. So here we have another outdoorsy picture. Looks like you and maybe a buddy with some gear on, maybe going in a hole. I don't know what you're doing. What do we got going on here?
Yeah. So just to posture a little bit, this picture reminds me of torture in a good way for two reasons. So this picture was taken in Kentucky, and it was about when we were about to go down a metal hole that kind of like migrated into a 15-mile cave system in Kentucky. I had never caved, and we caved for about 18 hours or something like that. Underground, no light, same temperature, foreign environment. It was hard physically and mentally, but that was like the first part of the fun torture. The second part was the other torture was having to drive by every distillery in Kentucky for recreation that didn't involve whiskey tasting.
Well, it's unfortunate, but it needed to be done. Yes. So, unfortunately, I guess have you caved since?
I haven't, but it's on the list. I mean, it's a very unique experience. Kind of running, jogging, hiking, crawling underground in water in the dirt. It's a true testament to character and perseverance through extremely uncomfortable situations.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how much I like small spaces, but maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
So we're sticking with the outdoorsy theme. We have a shirtless you and a small monkey.
This is hilarious.
What is going on in this picture, Chris?
First trip to Thailand, and went to Monkey Island and sharing a snack with a mate who is also enjoying a snack. That's about it. I'm sure whiskey was involved, but just not in the picture.
Absolutely. All right. We got two more. Next one. I don't even know who's who in this picture, but it just looks like a wild time. And I saw this picture. I was like, I got to ask, because it just looks like a little bit of craziness, a little bit of fun, and definitely seems like there's some alcohol involved. So what do we got going on in this picture?
No, this is completely sober. This is back in the Chicago days, back in the ruckus causing, probably vodka drinking. There was a day that vodka and whiskey were like both potential options. Embarrassing to say, but it's true.
Well, it looked like everybody was having a good time, so
Amen.
Nothing bad about that. And I think I dug pretty deep for this picture. I feel like, if I remember right, when I looked at the date, it was maybe like 8 years ago.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And we have one final picture. Again, without a shirt. Just lounging.
Playboy picture. Boating.
I mean, it looks like a man who's just relaxed, having a good time in a boat.
That's wildly embarrassing. Thank you for sharing.
Like I said, I had to dig deep to get to this, man. Your Instagram is not easy to find. All right, we'll kill that.
That's too funny. That goes back almost a decade.
Great. Yeah, I mean, these pictures are really old. And I noticed on your Instagram, I don't think you post on there much or at all anymore. I think like maybe the last post was a few years ago, or at least the majority of them were at least a few years back. So I knew there was some potential embarrassment coming, but I had to do it because it's just fun.
Thank you.
Well, we're coming right up on about an hour. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Chris, thanks so much for coming on, man. This was a great time. I love learning more about your whiskey, about your company, and hanging out with you for a little bit. If you got anything else you want to say before we get off here, please go for it. And after that, we'll say goodnight to everybody.
Yeah, the only thing that I want to add, and the only thing that we haven't touched on, we talked about all the whiskeys, but if we have any cocktail nerds following along, we were out of stock of our cocktail cherries, our premium cocktail cherries, for the last month. And as of a few days ago, they're back in stock. Most whiskey nerds, or we always call ourselves cocktail weenies, gravitate toward Luxardo cocktail cherries, right? But that is it's an Italian import. We make Michigan-made, U.S.-made cocktail cherries that are exceptional, equally as good, expensive, and kind of a hallmark of Northern Michigan. And if you haven't tried them yet, I would recommend giving them a whirl.
I totally forgot I have a jar of your cocktail cherries I need to get into. I totally forgot about that. Are those cherries, are they sourced from your family farm, or are those sourced just in the state?
Yeah, no, they're not from our family's farm. They're from a neighboring farm, probably 5 miles from our distillery. But they're born and bred. It's a breed of cherry called a Balaton sour cherry, and the only two places in the world that you should find that cherry is in Hungary or Traverse City, Northern Michigan. Great flavor, great crunch. Put them in a cocktail. It'll soak up the booze and you can enjoy it at the end, or put it on your ice cream and enjoy dessert. They're really good. And if you don't like it, email me personally and we'll find a solution.
Well, if the cherry flavor in your whiskey is any indication of those cherries, it's going to be good, because there is some damn good flavor in that whiskey of cherry. So I noticed a couple comments while we were going that people are like, they love cherry and whiskey. And if you guys love cherry and whiskey, definitely try out their cherry whiskey. I mean, realistically, like, I'm a big whiskey head. I don't drink flavored whiskeys. I think it's really good. So definitely go give it a shot. It's definitely worth your time. It's delicious. And I think it would make some fantastic cocktails. So definitely go out and give it a shot. But anyway, we got one more question here. If I go to Traverse City to do some outdoorsy stuff, is the distillery good to stop by? So I don't know if he's talking about right now or in general, but let's just talk about right now. I'm imagining the distillery is not open for tourists at the moment, but
yeah. The answer is hell yes. Our doors are open. We're not doing tours right now, but our still house, we're open for cocktails, samples. We're actually tomorrow, the day after tomorrow at 4 a.m, we are setting a shipping container bar on our patio to support better social distancing. And we'll be open all summer, and we're just kind of playing by the Michigan rules and accepting guests and flights and cocktails and whatever you're looking for.
Well, that is awesome. Yeah, definitely go check them out if you're in the area. Why wouldn't you, honest Charlie? Come on, man. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Had a great time. Hope you did too. Hope you had a couple good drinks. Hope you'll go out and try some of these guys' products. They're good. I wouldn't lie to you. You guys know me better than that. I say I'm the most honest reviews on YouTube, and I mean it. I wouldn't lie to you. It's good stuff. Go give it a shot. Let me know what you think. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, brother. Cheers.